Hello everyone. In this part, I will show you some excellent or model works of several experienced paper cutting artists and give you some explanations in my points so that you can have a better understanding of the arts of paper cutting. And we know that there have been many artists in Zhejiang province who are very accomplished in this field, but as time is limited in this part, that I have to just name a few of them and show you their excellent works. The first one I'd like to introduce is named Zhang Houguang. He was an authority of paper cutting community and he was highly respectable. But it was pity that he passed away in the 1990s. And now let's just look back and just look at his paper cutting works, and we can feel a sense of beauty and delightfulness from his paper works. And Mr. Zhang Houguang was from a county called Yueqing, and his paper cutting works conveys both awareness of his time and in the same time bears the characteristics of traditional Chinese paper cutting style and thoughts, as it is widely known that fine lines engraved paper cutting arts originated in Yueqing County. So Mr. Zhang has combined the traditional paper cutting with Yueqing's fine lines paper works. For example, in this paper cutting work, where we find children seems to be converting, and it has the traditional paper cutting feature of shaping round inside and square outside. And meanwhile, it contains a strong sense of joyfulness in his childhood. At our first glance, it seems to be very tough and not that delicate. But if we take a closer look, we will find that the technique of expression in Yueqing fine lines paper is fully reflected and embodied on this paperwork. And the traditional paper cutting techniques are also used here, and his paper cuttings are marked by the delightful and peppy vein and delicate marks of every cut on his paper. It is his original technique that he created that many people want to imitate, but they will find it's very hard to learn from. It was quite a unique style of his own. So we say that Mr. Zhang's paper cutting works are the combination of the roughness and the fineness. And now let's take a closer look at one of his works. His paper cutting is composed of many somewhat large blocks, and just with a few cuts and carving strokes that he managed to create a lively image of kids playing in the picture. That is an expression of his unique paper cutting style. And the next one. The next artist that I'm going to introduce is also a leader in paper cutting community in Zhejiang province. And his name is Luo Feng, and he's from the city of Ningbo. And there is a big feature in his paper cutting works that he used several pictures of the paper cutting skills. And what do his works features about, or what can we tell about from them? Well, we can read it just like a sense of brightness, and his works delicate clearly marks of the cuts, and it successfully combines the appeals of traditional Chinese paper cutting with the techniques of artistic expression in contemporary adornment, which means it contains both the contemporary decorative value and the charm of traditional paper cutting in all his works. And meanwhile, Luo Feng's paper cutting works have an excellent, highly developed skills and is very good at combining various techniques. So let's take this work, which means early spring in South China, as an example. And this paper cutting work is a role model that's from which we can find that this is to express the beauty of paper art in a very clear and thoughtful way. It also reflects the beauty of what we call Jiangnan, or the south part of China, and it conveys an idea of national characteristics and the dynamic beauty of the characters. And it has a magic effect that the sight of this work makes us feel so cheerful and delightful. And Mr. Luo's works contain both the traditional charm of Chinese paper cutting art and the delicate features of Jiangnan, or as I explained before, the south part of China and their paper cutting, and which reflect in his superb techniques of using the paper and tools to make patterns. He successfully combines the modern techniques and traditional styles in what we know the paper cutting art. And that shows both like a pattern for decoration and has some traditional value. So this is the unique features of Mr. Luo Feng's paper works. And we know that Luo taken several paper cuttings as an artistic means in his time. So let's have a look at one of his several pictures like this. And this paper cutting work is called a lady named Liu Yunliang, and which is one of the several paper cutting pictures. And that you can find exactly the characters' facial expressions and the movements which were so vivid on display. And you can find that how this work shows a sense of sadness from a couple who are about to separate from each other. So look, they're like whispering, and his wife seems to be praying for the husband's safety on his journey. And the maid behind the wife takes the husband's luggage with her, including the umbrella. And now you can see that how Luo manages to use such a small paper to reflect or tell the whole story, where the husband, the wife, and the maid are all in the roles and moves. And we know that several pictures using the paper cutting that are usually comprised of many pictures that we bound together. And each picture is an individual and independent story in the whole one. And what Mr. Luo does is to express the individual story by using the paper cutting skills to tell the whole story that people might feel touched. And we can also find from this piece of paper that whether the family was rich or not, and how their houses was profusely decorated. And that's all the details elements that were reflected in his works. And his paper cutting works are usually two-dimensional in composition, so they are typically plain in look, but his characters on the paper are three-dimensional that are brought by him into life for most of the time. For example, let's take a close look at the wife's clothes in the works that have accessories and decorative patterns, while the maid clothes are ordinary and without any patterns as we could find. So that's why we praise Luo's paper works that have expressed the skills and the characteristics of paper cutting art and get the truth of the art. which can be reflected all around and vividly in his characters. And the last one I'm going to introduce is also the famous paper cutting artist, a man who is very, very experienced. And his name is Wang Qiansong, Mr. Wang. And Mr. Wang is from the county called Haining in Zhejiang province. But unfortunately, that he has also passed away, and that we lost a well-respected paper cutting artist in our community. And his works also reflect on both the everyday life and the tradition and customs of the paper cutting art. And particularly, he is also a famous figure, very popular in the shadow play world in our Zhejiang province. And we might see that many of his paper cutting works are in some ways similar to the shadow plays works, and they look quite similar. So just to take a look at the shadow play paper and compare it with the paper cutting, and you will find it's look quite alike, just like the sister art forms, so they have similarities. And Wang himself used to be a serviceman and once had a military life. So many of his works were also a reflection of his life as a serviceman. And since Wang himself was from the countryside, so he would like to make his works show the everyday life there in the villages or on the farms. His paper cutting was also a combination of traditional Chinese art and decoration art. Because we know that paper cutting is a kind of decorative art, an art that is very, very practical in use for decorations. And Changhua itself was an ornament to the house and windows. So if we can combine decoration techniques and traditional style, that the works will look much, much more natural and vivid. So Mr. Wang Qiansong does very well in his paper cutting job in that aspect. And in his works, the traditional style blends naturally with the decorative style, that we just see a whole picture where everything exists in harmony, a beautiful and balanced state. As in this work that we can find people militarized in rural areas. And we may find from here the four corners of the paperwork showed a very strong sense of decoration. And the techniques of paper cutting are fully and expressly displayed in the works, and from which we can find the charm of traditional paper cutting. And this one seems to be a picture that depicts a beautiful park in which people are doing morning exercises. So the paperwork just named the morning exercises had done a very good job, because his cutting, which is a perfect combination of roughness and fineness, and they have reached a state of harmony. And we can find a kind of transformed roughness that have been clearly presented in all his paper works. That's all in my lecture. Thanks for watching.